We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, a regular podcast that you can find on all your podcast distribution networks. And remember to please like, share, and subscribe to In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. This is one of the premier pieces of content that we produce at Pro Cannabis Media. I'm very happy to be joined by Peter Doherty, who happens to be, well, someone who has, I think, almost as much experience in media in the Boston market as I do. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here, Jimmy. Thanks for the opportunity.
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing with your new Sustainable Cannabis Coalition and why you started this.
So I'm the CEO of a company called Grow IQ that's doing data analytics for how to monitor and optimize cultivation in grows in North America. And since I've been in this space for 4 years, what we found, especially now that it's COVID time, and so there aren't any face-to-face meetings, is the majority of the content that's being produced right now from companies that are operating in the space are largely what I'd call infomercials, which is highly problematic because nobody really wants to hear somebody else talk about their company and drone on about what they're going to do and how great they are. And
well, there goes my business model.
Yeah. And so fundamentally, my old CTO and I, we've done a couple companies together. He'd sent me a white paper from Worcester Polytech, and it was a paper about sustainability. And when I read it, I thought, here's the basis on which you could actually present to the market. So what we decided to do was get 20 companies together, which represent each link in the cannabis cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution supply chain, and have them present use cases about sustainability based on their area of expertise. That was the first part. So it's content that matters, where you can learn something from it. And then the other piece of what we're doing, which is probably the most interesting part, is largely what you just said, which is amplification of the content through each other. So every time one of these companies publishes, and this starts tonight, publishes a piece of content, all the other companies are amplifying it through their social media. So it's the power of many creating a club or a coalition in this case to talk about sustainability in the market in a way that's informative as opposed to infomercials.
Now I feel better about my business model.
Yeah, good.
Because we want to provide a friendly forum in a media environment, a professional media environment that allows the industry to tell their own stories.
Right.
And looking at companies that, like you have here, that have, every kind of link in the chain as far as a vertical grow goes,
Right.
is exactly what we want to do. How did you happen to pick these companies that you're working with?
So because I've been around the market for 4 years, you start to, one of the problems in the cannabis market is 90% of the companies are, I'll use different terminology than I would usually use, but they're problematic from a competency and capability perspective. And so we've been around long enough to know the 10% that are actually operating. So, the blog that launches tonight is coming from a top 10 tax and audit firm called CohnReznick that's going to describe what's happening in the market from a sustainability perspective, and how these other companies that represent part of the rest of the supply chain can inform that. And so I guess my answer is, we know who's for real and who's not for real. So it includes companies like CohnReznick, another company that does design, another one that does construction, another one that does control systems and chambers, stuff like that. Conviron and Argus, Argus is the best known controller company in the market, things like that. And TrueLeave, the largest multi-state operator in the US, things like that. So
Right.
We got a good group of people together who actually have street cred because they're either generating tons of revenue, they've survived or maybe they've put themselves up ahead of the companies that can't operate with competency just by generating revenue and sustaining in the market.
Right. And I noticed you have Simplifia on here too. That's a company we're familiar with here.
Very good. Yeah. Marion's a superstar, the
Yes.
CEO. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's a few on here that I recognize for sure. One of the things that we always talk about on this show on In the Weeds is the challenges of being in the cannabis space in a historic time where we both recognize, yeah, it's here legal in Massachusetts. Yeah, 5 more states got on board around the election time, but you're still scratching the surface when it comes to a new industry, especially one that's being projected in the billions, if not trillions, in
Right.
5 to 10 years. So I guess my question is, how much of a factor has that stigma been as you walk around and talk about what you're doing now?
So there's never been a market like this. That's the fastest growing market in the world. That's federally illegal in the United States. And so the reason I'm here as a data company is because so I've been in the tech business for 20 years. We were talking about in this market, I don't have to compete with Cisco and Microsoft and Symantec and Oracle because it's federally illegal. None of those companies will play in this market. So the reason we started a data company was because there's no competition. The odd thing about implementation of sustainability is because this market's been repressed, there's no science and data associated with it, at least, or I shouldn't say there's none. It's very limited because it's underfunded. There's no government funding associated with R&D in the cannabis space because it's illegal. Anyway, so there's an opportunity for the companies that are the leaders in this space to lead the market because nobody else is doing it right now. It's certainly not coming from the government. It's not coming from the states who are regulating it because they don't know how.
You come from a background of media. Back in the day, you could actually send a ratings diary and find out who was actually watching various shows.
Right.
Now that you're on the data side, you know that the value is on the back end because the internet tracks all the different search and all the different activity that we all take part in. Sometimes we recognize that we're being watched 24/7. Sometimes we don't. But in this particular case, data certainly is king in identifying who the target customer is. And in your knowledge of what you know, can you describe the typical cannabis user?
I can describe the typical cannabis manufacturer because so I'm not on the retail side. I'm business to business, right?
Right. A manufacturer. That's good.
Yeah. And
bottom
so
line is more of a B2B play because you've got data, right?
Yep. And the so the way I describe the cannabis market from a manufacturing perspective, I'm going to use the tech market from 20 years ago. So I had a company that wrote the first streaming media platform for the internet. We talked about that. It ended up getting acquired by EMC, which at the time in Hopkinton was the largest storage company in the world. The tech market in 2000 went from being standalone systems that were not connected or intelligent to connected intelligent systems, right? And so all the storage now talks to networking talks to the applications, and thus you have cloud computing and all the nifty stuff that tech does. In the ag market, you don't have any of that. So HVAC doesn't talk to lighting, doesn't talk to the nutrient systems, the fertigation systems, that doesn't talk to the controller systems. And essentially what we're doing is providing a brain. This is Grow IQ now, not the Sustainability Coalition, that helps talk to the arms and legs so they can all work in concert from a systems perspective. So the reason I'm giving you the example is the ag market is going through what the tech market went through 20 years ago, which is connected intelligent systems. And so when I look at the manufacturer space, all these companies need to move to standardized crop production in order to compete when federal deregulation occurs. And they're all somewhere along that spectrum or line of understanding that and implementing that. And what we're doing, the two things I'm doing is one is providing them the system so that they can create that standardized, intelligent, managed system, ultimately autonomous, and do it sustainably. So that's where this these two trails come together.
You've got a hemp product and you have a THC cannabis product.
Right.
Needless to say, the hemp product, 2018 Farm Bill, became technically legal. However, there's been a lot of problems with it. I think recently now the Department of Agriculture may have just put out the first hemp rules. I mean, nothing has been going very fast in this market, and yet the market and the sales of it continue to grow. You made an analogy with the .com at the turn of the century. Are we similar to that now?
Yeah, except for the overhang here is state by state regulation, which creates, it's a profit killer for the operators. Imagine having to set up a different operation in every state if you're a multi-state operator. It's horrible. And the regulations are different in every state. It's like, it's insane.
Is it horrible or a challenge?
I'm not in that side of the business for a reason.
Okay.
If that's a good answer.
That's a very good answer. That was a very, very good answer.
Yeah.
How important is alternative energy in this group that you have? There's one solar dispensary in Massachusetts, Solar Therapeutics down in Somerset.
Yep.
What's your feeling about that? Will there be more? Do you think that eventually we'll see more?
Absolutely. They're going to have to. The market right now, the average cost per pound to produce cannabis right now in the United States is somewhere between $400 and $500.
Yeah.
And when this federal deregulation occurs, it's going to need to be at somewhere $100 or below. Right. So that gives you a sense of the scale that or production cost reduction that these operators are going to have to go through in order to compete. And so the way I like to describe it is there's a tidal wave coming. The guys who are wearing swimmies aren't going to do so well, right? Because they just ain't going to make it. So you're either on this track of, and I don't think the majority of operators think this way because they're just trying to make money right now. It's hard to make money.
Right. And especially you make money now and something like that might happen. It could all go away or it could flourish. And that's the gamble, I guess. That's the risk reward, I guess, right?
Yep, it is. If you're going to be, so I'm a pick and shovel company. I'm selling data to the miners that are running into the hills with the picks and shovels that we're selling them in the horses. And I'd much rather sell shovels than I would be one of the guys digging in the cliffs, personally.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Does the fact that there are some states that allow home grow and some states that don't allow home grow, it impacts the industry because the laws, once they are launched, they're out there. And, the only thing that can change is a ballot question or a change of a state constitution. But I wonder what role does a home grow element in the legality of it in the state have on growing in particular?
I don't think I have a good answer for that because it's on the home operation side. And, I'm so focused on business to business that,
Gotcha.
If we were talking to, pick one of the operators in Massachusetts, we were talking to Rev Clinics or Apothca or Nature's Remedy or somebody else.
Yep.
I'm sure that they'd have smarter answers than I would. So I don't know that I should answer that question because it's not my area of expertise to the extent that I have expertise.
Well, then you've been in the media. You know how to dodge it. That's very good, Peter. You did very well on that. I just want to say.
As long as you didn't ask me what my sales quota was and whether I was getting there,
what are your numbers? Are you hitting your numbers this week or not, Peter? How many calls did you make this week? Exactly. Oh, God. Remember those days, don't you?
I do. Yep.
Why have you been in Boston your whole life? Have you been here?
I grew up in Rhode Island, ended up in New York when my dad was part of another media company, and then came back to Boston and for media. Started at Channel 7, Channel 5, then Fox, and then ended up in streaming media, and then stayed in tech since then.
Are you amazed that the Boston market, when you started, the Boston market, I'm pretty sure was the 5th largest in the United States, and I'm pretty sure now it's not even in the top 10.
That's
surprised
amazing,
at that?
Yeah, I am surprised at that.
I don't know where I was going with it. I just wanted to know.
As long as I don't have to sell to those numbers, I guess I should say I don't care. But
no reason to care right now.
Exactly.
But it is an amazing thing when you look at that, and yet the 4.4 million reach is still a pretty large reach for a major market.
It's still a highly valuable market, no doubt, because it's so influential, right? And certainly from a sports team's perspective as well. I mean, we're recognized, or we were, as such a center for excellence in sports and tech and biotech, right?
Right.
So,
and throw in education and throw in your medical and your hospitals. It's been a pretty good 20-year run, but Mr. Brady did okay for himself in a new uniform this year.
Yeah, he sure did. Yeah. You know? I'm glad we're talking about all the important things, Jimmy. We're getting Tom Brady in here.
Well, you know, what did you say off the top? We can't just talk about the X's and O's of growing cannabis and the data. We have to make it somewhat entertaining. And that's
absolutely,
again, that's one of the things that I like to think I can do just to make it a good conversation. I guess, Peter, lastly, if you want, we can wrap this thing up. What's your goal with your sustainable group here? What would you like to see happen over the next 2 to 3 years?
So our group is going to produce 3 months or 3.5 months of content out of 20 companies. And again, as I said, each link in the cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution supply chain. And I'm hoping what comes out of that is that we're providing information that allows operators, cultivators, for instance, understand how to begin to apply that so they can take the swimmies off, build their ship that's going to allow them to survive federal deregulation from a sustainability perspective, because ultimately sustainability drives the economics of how you operate as a producer, whether it's cultivation, manufacturing, or distribution. So I hope what we can provide is lessons learned by these companies that drive sustainability, drive economics, and allow them to compete in a either U.S. market or a global market. And it's going to be both when, deregulation occurs.
There you go. Well, Peter Doherty from Grow IQ and the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition, and many decades of broadcast experience in the Boston market. It's been great to chit chat with you. I love the reminiscing that we did before we started recording.
Really fun.
So please keep in touch. If there's anything I can do, please forward them my information. Happy to wave the flag for this industry as much as I possibly can.
It's been a pleasure, Jimmy. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. So for Peter Doherty from the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition, I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
There's a new boss in Washington, D.C., and President Joe Biden signs dozens of executive orders, but nothing on cannabis reform. A California credit union becomes a banking option for cannabis, and controversy about a Maine dispensary logo that regulators believe could appeal to kids. All that, plus the Jerry Garcia Cannabis Collection on Weed Talk News next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Every week, Ryan and I get together to talk about the biggest stories in the emerging cannabis industry. And this week, our top story comes from California, which also happens to be the nation's most populated state. Now, Ryan, if you had to pick between descheduling cannabis or opening the banks to the industry, what would be your choice?
That's a great question, Jimmy. It seems like quite the chicken and egg debate. Can you really have banking without rescheduling?
Can you? Yes, you can. Because if you go to a credit union, you're going to get all the same services at the credit union. And that's what the California Cannabis Industry Association has discovered. Indeed. And now they've cut a deal with the North Bay Credit Union. They're opening doors to members of the CCIA. That would be your California Cannabis Industry Association. That industry in California, it generates more than 10% of the total cannabis sales in the U.S. to the tune of $5.2 billion. And it employs close to 40,000 people, all who are now welcome to enjoy banking privileges at that same credit union. A good deal for all.
Well, Jimmy, speaking of billions, do you know who is number one in cannabis revenue in the U.S.?
Well, I'll tell you, I think it's either two, Curaleaf or Trulieve, one of those two.
Well, this is like who's the richest man in the US, Musk or Bezos. There's so much movement and valuations can turn so drastically. But what we do know is that Curaleaf has been holding that top spot for some time now. And the industry continues to mature, and we're only going to see more mergers and acquisitions take place, like in the case for Trulieve, making some big moves toward that big B word, billions. And for more on the markets, let's check in with Deborah Borchardt of the Green Market Report. Deborah?
Thanks, guys. On Tuesday, the Balance Company said it made the strategic decision to liquidate the majority of its cannabis oil inventories at market clearing prices in the fourth quarter of 2020. The stock fell over 10% on that news. The company said that the decision will lead to a related one-time financial statement impact in the fourth quarter between $9 million and $10 million. It was a big week for announcing capital raises. Harborside upsized its previously announced raise to approximately 27 million Canadian dollars. That's an increase of $7 million due to excess demand. Auxley Cannabis Group raised $15 million in a deal with ATB Capital Markets and Cantor Fitzgerald. Cannabis software company Blackbird and payment processor company AeroPay announced a strategic partnership to bring cashless payments to cannabis businesses for online ordering. You may recall Blackbird was sold in November by its parent company, Tilt Holdings. And that's the big news this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
It looks like Arizona is ready to open its adult use market this week, much faster than many in the industry actually hoped. Why? Well, that state is offering the already existing medical dispensary licensees the opportunity to offer adult use sales as well. 40 medical dispensaries had applied for adult use licenses in that state, and now Arizona is ready to give the green light. Interestingly enough, Rye, that isn't the first time, I believe, in the cannabis industry history that medical licensees got first crack at adult use licenses.
Well, there's always so much going on with these state regulators. And really, the next question is what states are ready to move into the world of legal cannabis? We know New York, the governor Cuomo has been pushing for legalization in the state of New York, and they're entering a stages of public comment for proposed legislation. And so I'm really excited because we have so many friends, Jimmy, in the cannabis industry that are attorneys that I know will be sitting in on some of these forums for public comment. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in New York. And Jimmy, for our main cannabis report, some more regulation fun. Seaweed Cannabis Company has been cited by the Office of Marijuana Policy for a violation relating to their use of a mermaid on their logo, and therefore causes concern that the logo could be attractive to children. And Jimmy, I know you have an opinion on this.
Now, first of all, we want to make sure that everybody understands. Now, they're probably looking at the graphic at this point. It's sea as in the water, ocean, SEAC, as opposed to the C in cannabis. So think about this, Rye. You know, there are a lot of similar clauses in a lot of these state regulations because the regulators do not want these logos to appeal to anyone under the age of 21. That includes like statements and designs, images, including those logos. And that's what's been going on in Maine. Now, as we look at this logo, you know, I see a mermaid. Okay, how many kids out there, you know what, and I hate to use the word kids because we're not really talking about kids. We're talking about people under the age of 21. And there's a big difference between someone who's 18 or 15 or 7 when it comes to parenting those kids. Now, for me, I like the opportunity to actually have a conversation with any kid about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. Oh, not cannabis, because cannabis is a plant. And that is a huge difference. And I know there are advocates out there always looking to make that distinction. Rye, I'm going to go out on a limb and think every morning, do you have a cup of coffee?
I do, every single day.
And do you know that 91% of Americans have a cup of coffee and use caffeine on a daily basis? And did you know that caffeine is a drug and it is addictive? Did you know that?
I did know that. Absolutely. It's concerning. I drink way too much of it.
And so do a lot of people out there. And everybody knows if you skip a day, if you miss out on your morning coffee or your afternoon cup of coffee, what kind of reaction in your body do you have?
Not a good one. I get very grouchy myself.
I get a headache. Okay. And that's kind of where I was going with that. So I guess my point is, I understand and respect regulations are important. Do I want cartoon characters promoting cannabis for adult use sales? No, I do not. I want to make sure everybody understands that. However, I do think that these are great opportunities for parents to have these kinds of conversations with their kids. It's always kind of awkward, right? Now, you don't know this because you're not a parent, to have that sex, drugs, and rock and roll talk with your kid. It's awkward for any adult. But this is a great time and a great opportunity in legal use states to open the door and start talking and communicating to your kids. Because if you don't educate your kids, and by the way, there's an assumption here that the adults in the room would actually educate themselves about cannabis, right, Rye? I mean, education drives all arguments, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, you know, these regulations are not that different than what we have proposed in other states, Jimmy. In Massachusetts, very similar clause has been proposed and potentially put into effect, portraying or representing someone under the age of 21. And this comes from the tobacco advertising containing celebrities, endorsements, cartoons, everything you mentioned. And so it's interesting for those of you that look at this logo, you can decide what you think.
I don't know. When I was a kid, I did not dream about mermaids. Let's just say, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't. But I was an athlete, so I dreamed about sports figures, and I don't think sports figures should be endorsing cannabis for adult use. However, we can get into the fact that there are plenty of kids out there who have saved their lives through the use of cannabis directed by a medical doctor. So again, conversation, education, have those kinds of conversations with your kids. And as far as the regulations go, leave it to the regulators because you just can't fight City Hall, can you, Rye?
You absolutely cannot. You can't fight City Hall, but we can have our voices heard in our nation's capital.
That's right. And you know, I bet you knew that there's actually been quite a few changes in our nation's capital over the last week as a new administration starts their business of running our government. Here is the DC report with Vote Pro Podcast, Phil Adams. Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC report. With the 117th Congress now open for legislative business, Republican Congressman Greg Steube of Florida has introduced the first new cannabis reform bill in the House. Unlike last year's MORE Act, however, the new legislation would not end the federal prohibition on cannabis. Instead, the bill would order Attorney General to reschedule cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug. The reclassification to Schedule 3 would protect federal employees who use cannabis. It would also remove many of the legal impediments to scientific research and would allow cannabis companies to deduct business expenses from their federal taxes. Such rescheduling is more in line with the views of President Joe Biden, who remains opposed to legalizing cannabis for adult use. In one of his last official acts as President of the United States, Donald Trump granted clemency this week to dozens of people convicted of nonviolent marijuana offenses. Last November, then President Trump received a letter from a coalition of celebrities, GOP officials, and civil rights advocates urging him to pardon or commute the sentences of 24 people serving time in federal prison, including several serving life sentences for cannabis possession. One such recipient is Craig Cecil, who, after getting the news in a call from Trump's daughter Ivanka, said, quote, "It feels like a new life. Just to know that I won't have to go back to prison is a huge relief." Cecil had been released to home confinement in June due to COVID. A Virginia Senate subcommittee on marijuana has approved amendments to the legalization bill put forward last week by Governor Ralph Northam. The bill would, among other provisions, allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis and to cultivate up to 4 cannabis plants for personal use. Approval by the subcommittee clears the way for the measure to be adopted by the full Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee. From there, the bill would likely be referred first to the Judiciary and then to the Finance Committee before moving to the floor of the Virginia Senate for a vote. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Pot.
Our next story comes from a chief science officer in Encinitas, California. Dr. Joseph Romahi is warning the industry about a virus that may have spread across the country. Sound familiar? The virus is known in botanical circles as hop latent viroid, HPLVD. He believes that the cannabis industry in California has been dealing with this since 2014. According to the doctor, there are many reports of dudding. Now, Rye, do you know what dudding is?
I absolutely do not.
That's why I'm here. Okay. Dudding is defined as stunted growth, a lack of trichomes, and a lack of secondary metabolites such as cannabinoids and terpenes. So here's the weird coincidence with COVID-19. It can be asymptomatic and it's not being tested by labs. Now, the doctor recommends cleaning harvest products with bleach. Now, that is not cleaning cannabis with bleach, okay? It is cleaning the machines that harvest the cannabis with bleach. Now, there is no report of the effects of this virus on humans, just the plants. Right.
Interesting. Well, Jimmy, it's been some time since we last spoke about the vape crisis back in 2019, and we're still learning about the risks of a lot of the ingredients that were in those cartridges. What we do know is that ingredients such as propylene glycol and phytol has been studied and published in the Inhalation Toxicology, a journal for international respiratory research. And this study has shown that phytol could be significantly more toxic. When this study was conducted on rats, the study had to be stopped when using phytol due to severe conditions, including death. Whereas the rats that show no adverse effects after 14 days of exposure to the propylene glycol. So this is very different than what we heard about at the beginning, where both of these could be potentially toxic and deadly. And we know that they both are very toxic, but we might be finding that only one of them is deadly, Jimmy.
Right. Know what's in your vape before you vape. That's all I can say. Ask for what the ingredients are and how it has been cut.
And now let's move on to our friend Solomon Israel from MJ Biz Daily International with our Canadian Cannabis Report. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canada's cannabis surplus is only growing larger. New figures show producers added more than 220,000 kilograms of marijuana last October when the outdoor fall harvest came in. That's about 50% more than the previous monthly record, which was set in the previous October. All that inventory could contribute to falling cannabis prices in Canada. Two major Canadian cannabis store chains are merging, continuing a consolidation trend in marijuana retail. Alcanna is spinning off its retail business, combining it with competing retailer YSS Corporation. The new retailer will have 53 stores across Canada, with more on the way. And Aurora Cannabis has laid off members of its internal sales team after hiring Great North Distributors to serve as its Canadian sales representative. The company wouldn't say exactly how many employees lost their jobs. Aurora has cut jobs and closed facilities in the past year as it reduces its production capacity. You can read those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel for Marijuana Business Daily.
Okay, we saved the best story for last. Since I got to hang out with the Grateful Dead members 1 week back in the mid-'80s in the state of Maine, I want to share the story about the soon-to-be-released Jerry Garcia Cannabis Collection produced by Holistic Industries in California. There will be 3 strains of flower and guitar pick-shaped edibles. With the blessing of the Garcia family, Holistic Industries is distributing this throughout their home state of California. The Garcia hand-picked collection will include a variety of strains like Chemdog, not to be confused with Remdog, SFV of Indica, and Fire OG, a hybrid. So, read the quote by Trixie Garcia, Jerry's daughter, from an article in Rolling Stone. This is great.
Oh, what a powerful line meant to honor her father's long-standing advocacy for legalization. And she's noting that the family wants to create a spontaneous and harmonious cannabis experience to bring people together in the way that only Jerry could. And she continued by saying that a joint became a bridge between him and those around him.
Hey, what a long, strange trip it's been, huh? Did you like that? That's a play on a lyric. You know that, right?
I do now, Jimmy. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll do it for another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.